Hello and welcome back. It's been a long time since I've put a video up. I think more than a year at this point. Real life and school have gotten in the way, and I'm going to be working a lot more in my shop this summer, so I won't really have a whole lot of time for gaming, but I will definitely have more than I did during school when I was trying to do both at the same time. Also, probably, might take a couple videos of some of the restoration projects I got going on, because a lot of cool stuff I get to work on this year. Not my stuff, things I'm getting paid to do. So my stuff is probably going to have to wait, but if I get anything in on the Skyliner or the Prelude or even the things I have to do to the Trans Am this year, I'll probably put a quick video up just because that's really kind of the bigger side of me is the mechanic stuff versus gaming. That was my career for nearly a decade until I decided maybe I might be smart enough to be an engineer, which, time will tell whether that's actually true or not. So, where I am on gaming is Stellaris, actually, very heavily. I bought it when it came out, but then I got so buried in schoolwork that I haven't really had a whole lot of time for gaming lately. And in the meantime, I was last playing on like 1.2, and now 1.6 released this week. And Utopia came out, which I have Utopia. I did not get Leviathans. Only DLCs I have are Utopia, the Horizon Signal, which I think was free for everybody, and I got the anniversary, pack that they put out this week to, celebrate the 1 year. Really just kind of play through this, the early game kind of the same way. At least these opening steps go the same way for me every time. I pick the technologies that have the most immediate benefit, look at any available scientists, and pick the ones that I think are the best. And seeing so many that had the Spark of Genius trait was really exciting, because normally I don't even get one, and instead I had 2 already, and there were 5 to pick from, so I got a little spoiled there. I really like the +3 energy credits that come from the solar panel network, and the +1 monthly influence that comes with planetary unification allows me to put up a extra frontier outpost that I would have to wait a little later for in the early game, so I can claim a little extra more territory. And I'm going with nuclear missiles because I'm going to go with a slightly different build strategy on my ships than I typically do, just to see how it works out. Not going to get into a whole lot of detail here because it's not really relevant, and it's going to bog down the whole playthrough. But the gist of it is, I'm going to build ships designed to take on a specific defense, such as shields or armor. And instead of just getting into a first fight, getting my butt handed to me, and then respecking to take on a specific enemy, just going to kind of change the fleet balance of weapons types to deal with specific threats. Also, one of the very first things I do, since I do usually pick a scientist right from the get-go, is I get a second science ship queued up at the very beginning. I also like to clear off the any tile blockers for food resources on my home planet, because I really like to get my population growing as quickly and as soon as possible. I try to get as many science ships. I try to get at least 3 science ships going early on, because I really like clearing a lot of the map quickly. It allows me to plan my expansion a lot better, because I know where the better planets are and which systems have the most resources, so I know where to focus colonization efforts and where to drop that first frontier outpost so I can get more resources. And to that end, I always split off one of my Corvettes so it can take a peek into all the nearby systems. The advantage of that is if it happens to drop into the middle of a huge hostile fleet or group of organisms, whatever goes in there is going to get vaporized anyway, and a 58, mineral cost Corvette is a lot cheaper than a 95 mineral cost science ship with a scientist that cost 50 influence on board. So, and there's no point in sending all 3 Corvettes, because at this stage, with their tech level and low defenses, they'll pretty much just get vaporized anyway, and then I've lost 3 ships instead of just 1. And just I set up the my civilization more on a roleplay basis, not really min-maxing or going for specific bonuses. I just you know, what type of society I'd like to play as. When playing a democratic government type, I really find it helpful to focus on those mandates in the early game, because I tend to drop as many frontier outposts as quickly as I can, and sometimes I end up running a slight deficit, only for a little while. Influence is one of those limiting currencies in the early game that can really mess you up if you don't pay attention to it, because you really need that to replace and hire new
Construction
leaders.
complete.
And if you find yourself completely out, especially in the early game, you can find expansion and just your whole empire completely crippled. If you've ever played Stellaris, because honestly most people who have played it and are watching
Tile
this
blocker
have
cleared.
more time in the game than I do, that's all old hat, but I'm explaining this to the rare person who maybe doesn't really know what's going on in the game. Setting up my initial exploration orders for my first science ship, which I will eventually end up changing. This is all recorded after the fact, by the way. I'm not so hot when it comes to recording as I play, just because I don't really find myself that interesting to listen to, and especially just having to talk to myself. Easier to just kind of narrate how things are going and get into my general thought processes behind what I'm doing after the fact. Right now I'm just taking a tour of the solar system, showing off all the little planets and their fancy graphics. Good old planet Earth. I really like the way, and you may notice this if I focus on it later in the game, as a colony expands, the city lights actually expand more across the planet. And this is something that doesn't really bug me, but I did notice it. They've got the correct texture for the moon, but the moon is not tidally locked. Once again, if you're long-time Stellaris player, that's really nothing new, especially if you play a human species that starts in the Sol system, but it doesn't really bother me, it's just something I noticed. They got a pretty good texture map of Mars going on. You got Valles Marineris right there, front and center. Got the hexagonal ice cap, and that was Olympus Mons. I just drew a circle around there. Pretty sure Venus is just a generic toxic world texture, because the real Venus just looks like a yellow blob in space. Poking around through the asteroid belt. If you've been watching the Expanse series, has got a little bit of significance to you. Good texture on Jupiter. Really like the way that one looks. Discovering our first signs of alien life in the universe. Everybody panic! Or not. I really like the anomaly system and all the little storytelling blurbs that come up out of that. And plus, from a practical standpoint, they really help. They're kind of like the goody huts in Civilization, which I'm a long-time Civ player, going all the way back to Civ 2. And finding the goody huts is always, exciting, except for when you trip over one and like 30 barbarians pop out around it, which, now that I think of it, really they cut back on that since Civilization 2. A little more flavor text going on. This early game is really, it's really more about exploration and expansion, and so there's not a whole lot from a gameplay perspective that really is too exciting to talk about. But, so as I was saying, or I don't think I actually got into it yet, because of the nature of this game, I'm probably going to have to start cutting down and editing some things, just especially once I get to the mid-game. I'm going to try to alleviate that. I am going for more active diplomacy. I want to be on people's sides when they get into wars, and I want people on my side if I decide to get into a war. Just because if you try to play diplomacy passively in this game, it can end up really boring. For me, Stellaris, it's really a game that you have to put some effort into sometimes to get a whole lot out of. because if you just kind of wait for the point where, you know, you think your fleet is built up to the where you want it, and you start, you know, leading things, and that's a completely legitimate way to play on your own. People are going to be watching this, so I'm going to try to make it more interesting. And by having that more active diplomacy, I can kind of get more involved in the goings-on of the galaxy, and hopefully it won't be like 60 years before the first exciting thing happens. And also, it just kind of gives me a better idea of how the general state of the galaxy is going. And it never hurts to have more allies. I don't deploy my construction ship right away. That's the other big thing about my early game strategy. I tend to look for the like +3 and +4 asteroids to set my first mines up, but I didn't go with that this time because there's actually a +3 over there in Alpha Centauri. But I would have to jump over, build the mining station, and then jump back. And then just talking about a lost time type issue, I really didn't want to get into that. So we're gonna go ahead and just fully develop Sol before I go anywhere else, just because from my experience playing human type civilizations with the Sol system, they kind of start you with the same general star system neighbors. There's really never a whole lot going on in Barnard's star, so I don't even really pay any attention to it anymore. As far as prioritizing my expansion goes, I noticed Sirius has a size 21 planet in it, which for my first planet, I always try to colonize big, because those research penalties and the Unity penalties for expanding to new colonies, I really try to minimize those as much as possible, like I said. And if I have a bigger planet to expand on, that's a lot more growth space to fill out before I have to strike out on my own. So at this point, I've decided just going to colonize or fully develop as much of the Sol system as I can, and then I'll move on and drop those other stations. I don't really min-max it, as in abusing game mechanics, but especially in the early game, Game, I've been through it enough times.
Construction complete.
I kind of want to get on with it, and without cranking up the game speed, which I've found has gotten me into trouble a couple times, I really prefer to just get my mineral base built up as quickly as possible, because I find especially in an early game, and this is once again not news to anyone who's ever even played this game once, you're really mineral limited in the early game. So I try to get those stations set up as quickly as possible, because the sooner you're bringing them in, the longer term impact that has. And I'll actually run in the red on energy if I know I've got a pretty handy source to make up for that deficit quickly in the early game, because I just got to get those minerals coming in so that I don't have to wait for the stockpile to build up before I build my next thing. And right now, Sol is sitting at +7 total energy and +8 minerals, so it's a pretty good... my time is definitely better spent building mining stations on the available planets, or planetoids, or whatever that might have mineral deposits here, than hopping over to Alpha Centauri just for that +3. Sometimes I've gotten lucky and I've had like 2 +3s in +3 asteroids or something in my home system, and that's really when you want to prioritize, because if you can get a total of 6 minerals per month at the cost of 2 energy, that's much better than 4 for 2. Just basic math. And that, like I said, that sounds really min-maxy, but that's just me trying to speed things along and just take the most efficient path through the early game.
System survey complete. Anomaly found.
And the research points, and sometimes you get minerals, sometimes you get energy credits. So all these anomalies are really worth getting into in the early game. that Goody Hut comparison is really somebody I know made that comparison. Somebody I know that plays this game a whole lot more than I do. They made that comparison, and it really struck with me. I hadn't been thinking of it in those terms until they brought it up, and that's exactly what these anomalies are. Is just little opportunities for extra bonuses. You get research, and sometimes you get fully surveyed system, which is like the crudely drawn maps that you end up getting in Civilization. Yeah, talking about Civilization and 4X games and lack of time, I maybe have like 20 hours total into Civilization 6, and I cannot wait to get back to that one. But it honestly looks like I'll be, on Civilization, I'll be putting more time into 5, because I built my wife a pretty decent gaming rig. I had an old GTX 670 laying around from my first build, and so for a pretty decent amount of money, for a pretty reasonable amount of money, not decent, we built her a pretty nice little low buck rig so she could study, because she went back to school also, and she really wants to, now that she's out, she really wants to play Civilization. We've played 4 a lot on our laptops, but she's always wanted to get into 5, and I got her the Anniversary Edition a while back. She hasn't been able to play it till now, so maybe in my free time when I'm not, playing multiplayer with her, or trying to cover Stellaris, or trying to recover Kerbal Space Program, or all the other 1.5 million things I've got going on, I can get some time in with Civilization 6. From what I have played, I've just been absolutely overjoyed with the way it came out. I really like the art direction and the feel of the game. I just can't say much more beyond
Construction complete.
Yeah, beyond the flight sims and the space combat stuff and all the Kerbal Space Program, I'm a huge 4X gamer, but they're not necessarily the most intriguing things to watch sometimes, so I don't really intend on putting a whole lot of that on my channel. Finally get our first big alien species observed in the wild. Which, predictably, I kind of knew who these guys were before I clicked on them. They're everywhere in every game. Just a minor spoiler to call them a space whale. So that's what they are. But even then, like, I forget which tooltip it. Like, I could hover a tooltip over it right now and it would say space whale. So, not much of a spoiler. If the game's own interface will give it away. Presenting this playthrough from the perspective and to people who are maybe not familiar with the game, because it's been out so long and it's got a lot of YouTube coverage from a lot, more accomplished and better people than I. So I just wanted to run through this and kind of share my own take on it. So really the primary point in me doing this playthrough is to kind of ease my way back into video making, because it has been a while since I've done anything, and especially voiceover and stuff, and kind of keeping on task as far as thoughts and keeping focused on the game, as that whole, Civilization tangent shows is a little rusty at that. So it's a nice kind of slow moving game, and can get... Plus, it's one I'm really enjoying. It gives me an excuse to play more Stellaris, which is always something I like. I've really, really enjoyed this game. A lot of the criticism it gets about kind of being slow, especially in the mid-game, I totally get that. And I'm going to do my best to kind of alleviate that. But as much as I say I haven't played the whole thing through, I have played enough of it to kind of have a feel for where the weaknesses are as far as what portions of the game. And once I get to the mid-game, there are probably going to be quite a few edits. Even with me wanting to be more active in diplomacy, so that I'm kind of, if something happens in the galaxy, I want to be a part of it. It's just so I have it covered.
Construction complete.
But even so, there's probably going to be some periods where I'm just going through planets, clicking and upgrading buildings and hustling scientists and governors and other things around, and people really don't need to see every bleeding second of that. They just kind of need the broad strokes of what I'm trying to accomplish and how things go. The advantage of recording as I play is if something unexpected does blow up, I've got it, and I can cover that in post. So, because here I am about, almost 20 minutes into the game, and it's halfway through the second year, or got 2.5 years into it, and still quite a bit of stuff that is just not really all that interesting to watch. The very, very early game can be kind of a grind, and like I said, this isn't too terribly intriguing to watch, but if you haven't played the game before, it can kind of give you an idea. If you're on the fence about, is this something that I'd be into? That's kind of why I'm going every
system survey complete.
Every move. And right after I say that, I find an indigenous pre-sentient species on what had been my best colonization target, which was kind of a bummer.
Complete.
I have no problem uplifting those species later, but just the time investment in it. It takes that size 21 planet, and with 3 of their populations on it, it makes it a size 18, so it's really not a whole lot better than my starting world. So gonna keep an eye out for something bigger, and I don't know if I actually hover it over, but yeah, that Damia system has a size 25 continental world, which is about as perfect a colonization target as I could pick. Once it gets surveyed, it's even got quite a bit of food on it, which makes it a good early colony, because food-rich early colonies will pay off in the long run by keeping your population growth at a fairly decent rate. When I've played through on my own, I have noticed I tend to massively overbuild food, and I definitely want to curb that temptation on this playthrough, just because past a certain point it really doesn't serve much purpose, and there's that's production capacity I could be putting to better use for, say, minerals and energy credits, stuff that actually matters. And this is right here is the biggest change in the 1.5 banks / Utopia expansion is traditions. I have tried a couple different strategies with traditions. I've tried just rushing individual policies all the way through, but I've kind of taken more of a piecemeal approach to that, and it became really obvious to me once I paid attention to it. Because you see that they have all these adoption effects and then their finisher effects. And right there on prosperity, you see the adoption effect. Mining station build costs reduced by 33%. That is huge in the early game. A mining station is typically about 90 minerals if you don't have any modifiers from, say, leaders or policies going on. And that's a fairly significant investment. If you can drop that by 33%, that becomes around 60 minerals. And so if you do the math, with one of your with your first combat ships costing about 58 minerals, for every 2 mining stations you build, that is the cost of a combat ship you saved. And you see down there in Discovery, they have the same research build cost reduction for just adopting the policy. Since I'm focused on in the very beginning, getting just minerals and energy credits built up, prosperity is typically the one I go for anymore first.
Complete.
Just get that adoption effect going on, because that kind of snowballs minerals saved or things I can put for other purposes. And almost right on cue, after I finish that rant, the solar panel network research finishes, and so that's an extra +3 research point energy credits I can get out of a space station. And deflectors are pretty much the no-brainer to go for. Definitely want to improve the survivability of my ships and start moving down the deflector shield tech line. You can play this game completely pacifist if that's your thing. I've done a couple playthroughs, not all the way, obviously, and it actually is an interesting way to play. It's not entirely boring, because you've got to put a lot of effort into diplomacy and building alliances, so you got people to cover your back, and it kind of restricts how you can wage war, which is interesting. But I want to get into some fights because they're interesting and fun to watch. So I'm going to be heading down the military path.
System
I can see from my
survey
timestamp
complete.
right here, I'm running out of time. So I'm going to try to get like 2 of these up per week. I'm thinking on kind of a Tuesday, Thursday thing. This week got incredibly crazy because my wife's birthday was yesterday, and then we've actually had tornadoes and thunderstorms today. I was midway through recording this earlier when the power went out. So, yeah, that was fun stuff. But I'm going to try to get 2 of these up per week. Going to be about 20-25 minutes, at least in the early stages. It's going to be no edits, but you know, if things start to really bog down, I'm going to start chopping some things out just to kind of speed things along, because it's interesting enough for me to play, but maybe not to watch. So all that said, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more in the future.